from the Pentagon. I was saving my shekels to go to school to get my healthcare training. And I was part of a startup internet company, something I was passionately unpassionate about. So perhaps like Meetup would not be, well, I already knew what I was doing, but 9/11 hastened my journey out of that world. Although it was a good world to be part of for a short period of time. But I remember that day very well. I remember going outside and you could see the smoke and you could smell the jet fumes. As I drove down the George Washington Parkway, you saw this mass exodus of all the uniformed armed service professionals literally walking down the highway, and the city shutting down, and watching those Twin Towers fall, and just having this deep sense of a tectonic shift on planet Earth at that time. And we did kind of have a tectonic shift. And for a moment, we remembered that we were loved innately. You know, our friend here said for 5 hours, I was so present. And for a few days, we were so present. And it didn't matter if you were black, Jew, Muslim, Asian, Jamaican, Canadian, Moroccan. There was somehow a remembrance of a oneness that wakes up in times of either profound suffering or profound bliss. It's funny how that happens. But then we forgot. We went back to sleep and we said, no, wait, you know what? Wait a minute. We got to be safe. We have to be secure. So we launched into 10 years of trying to build a castle of security. And let me tell you, security, as Helen Keller says, is an illusion. It doesn't exist in nature, and nor does it exist anywhere. And when I tell you, when our focus is safety and security, if you want to disengage yourself from passion, from creativity, from identity, from knowing who you are and what you're here to do, try to be safe. Try to be secure. It's funny, people will write their list of the ideal relationship they want to create from a sense of identity of what they think they want. But I'll tell you, all relationships show up to screw with your identity. Ask anybody who's in a relationship that maintains who you think you are and who that other person is. So this. And progress, remember I talked about change? I said, you know, there was a tectonic shift and there was all this change that happened. We became obsessed with security. But real progress happens when our identity shifts, when our fundamental orientation from life shifts away from there's a me and there's a Shuzara, and there's a me and there's a you, and there's a me and there's a you, and somehow we're different, and I got to be safe and I got to be secure, towards an orientation that says the same I am is the same I am in Shuzara. And that I'm identifying, in her words, more with the grid than I am with the form. I'm identifying with the content of life, not the form it takes. And I understand that all life is this immense, eternal celebration of our incarnation in this dance of souls that brought us together here tonight. So instead, we went and we tried to build a castle that no one could break into. And after 2 wars and taking our shoes off at the airport, nothing's fundamentally changed. I mean, it hasn't. In fact, one could argue that we've become more polarized in some senses. You see, but this isn't a bad thing, because the more juice there is between 2 poles, the more power there is for transformation. You know, when he asked if he should share his I Pledge Allegiance, I was thinking, yeah, why don't you try rolling that by Michelle Bachmann and see how she does. You see, we're so polarized now, but this is actually where the juice was. This is the transformative impetus. You know, all those pictures of the cosmos that we saw on the screen. Do you think it was just like, oh, you know, I think I'm just going to unfold and blossom? No, it was like this tectonic eruption of gas, like a giant cosmic burp, fart, explosion. But this is what actually gives birth to life. This is the evolutionary impulse itself. And we are sitting on this evolutionary wave that's pushing us forward. And the energy of 9/11, if you want to look at it to stay safe, great. Disengage. I can tell you exactly where that's going to go. It's the same energy that created a mortgage-backed security crisis where greed overtook the world and has put the whole globe in a massive financially challenged position. I mean, like one of the worst financial crises that we've known of. But as Brian said, love changes everything. And it can change everything. It's up to us. Let me see if I got anything else interesting in here. You know, I think the great moments of pain, too, are we let our guard down. You know, 9/11, for a moment, forced us to let our guard down and let our God in. The thing is, though, is most of us we sort of walk up to the edge, and we go, oh, wow, that's really uncomfortable. The edge, and then we walk back. So we're more let our guard down for a minute, and we let our God in for a moment. But then we tend to retreat back into what we know, which is the story. You know, as Katie Byron says, who would you be without your story that there's something out there that's not safe? Who would you be without your story that you're just kind of chugging along in Charlotte and your input into the world isn't that important? Literally, I'm asking you, who would you be without that story? Nelson Mandela was in prison for over 30 years. He stepped up. He stepped up to create a new country of South Africa. I just like to say it like that. Never been there. Right? Martin Luther King, he didn't distance himself from the oppression that was happening at the time. He said, no, I see it, but I'm not going to polarize. I'll find my courage, I'll find my grace. And before we even had Meetup, before we had text messaging, before we had Twitter, before we had Facebook, he galvanized over 500,000 people to meet in the March on Washington, which was a perfect example of love in action. Mother Teresa wrote letter year after year after year after year after year after year to get funding for her mission in Calcutta, with the poorest of the poor, and it took a long time, and she didn't give up. So thank God they got over their story that things, A, were supposed to work in their time, and B, that they weren't called to step up. They weren't called to be great. They weren't called to be brilliant. They weren't called to be fantastic leaders and exemplars of the evolutionary impulse itself pushing through all of us. Because if it's not happening through you, that's one way in which God is unable to express itself. Because it happens through you. It happens through me. It happens through all of us. In this collective, we create such a powerful vortex of transformative energy when we do this together. Pierre Teilhard de Chardin has a great quote. He has two quotes. One is that for life to remain alive, it has to constantly be changing. For life to remain alive, it has to be constantly changing. And he also has a quote, which I have to paraphrase because I can't remember it off the top of my head exactly. But he said, there will come a day when we will have mastered the winds, we will have mastered the air, we will have mastered the sun. And then there will come a day when we remember love. And for the second time in human history, man will have discovered fire. That's what I am calling me to do tonight in remembrance of 9/11. But not as a thing that, oh, that was so bad. But as this is such an incredible wake-up call. You know, it's like when people come to me and they have a lot of health challenges. Their pain, they're challenging, they're suffering, their symptoms. There's two things you can do. You have two choices. You can medicate and turn it off and numb it out, or you can get what your body's telling you. To stop, to pay attention, and to do something different. To wake up, which is the most natural thing. In fact, staying asleep takes so much energy. It takes so much more energy to disconnect over the long haul. And the momentary pulse of discomfort and pain that comes from looking yourself so squarely in the eyes far transcends the lifetimes of checkout and disconnection that come from trying to